So I'm going to tell a story, and I'm willing to bet that you can relate to this story in some way, so pay attention. When I was younger, about 20 or younger, I had this problem, and I'm willing to bet that you had this problem too. I would spend weeks and weeks and months and like a year on a piano piece before it even started to sound anything like it was supposed to sound at all. In fact, it sounded like a big clunky mess for the longest time. It was super frustrating. It took me a really long time to learn pieces. Does this sound familiar? Well, you're probably in the same boat that I was in, or maybe you were, of not knowing about this really, really important skill. And what am I talking about? Well, you probably see from the title that today, I'm going to tell you all about sight reading. The first tip that I have for you when it comes to sight reading is to pick a piece that's easier and difficult than what you're currently working on. So say, just for an example, that we are working on this hand clapping song. There's a couple of things I want you to take notice of the song that you're currently working on. You may be working on something harder, a little bit easier, and that's okay. But say you're working on this one, and what you want to do is you just want to take a first glance at it, right? Just take a little screenshot of it. And one thing I want you to notice first is the note density. That's the right piece that we're looking for, which is how dense is the page of notes. You can see that this has some density to it, like there are some clusters of notes, but there's also a lot of space going on here. And you can use that to your advantage, because if I go way far in this lesson book, you can see by this piece that there's more note density, just more black line, there's more black mess on the page is what I'm saying. And you can use that to identify from sight that this piece is probably more difficult than this one. So it would not be a good choice. There are some other factors. Let's take a look at what those may be. You want to look at like maybe your key signature, right? How many sharps or flats? If you've only been playing pieces with one sharp or one flat so far, it doesn't make sense to sight read something with 5 sharps, 6 flats, 7 flats, 7 sharps. You want to stick around where you're at with the key. In fact, if you're new to sight reading, I highly recommend that you basically stick with things in the key of C. So no sharp, or A minor. So no sharps, no flats in this particular case. So easier key signature wise. Time signature 3/4. So if I've never played anything in 6/8, it doesn't make sense to sight read something in 6/8. Now does it? Because I've never had experience with it before. That's why you always want to do easier than what you're currently working on, because the whole goal with sight reading example, by the way, sight reading is reading from sight, and the whole goal of it is to be able to play from the beginning of the example to the end of the example with as few mistakes as possible. Some other things that you maybe want to look out for is like maybe hand position changes. I see kind of a big gap there, so you would have to account for that. Whereas maybe another piece you're looking for maybe has the same kind of hand position change, or maybe no hand position changes at all. Some minor things, look for basically look for anything on the page that you don't know. And if there's a lot of stuff on the page you don't know yet, then you can't sight read it. Let's look at what a good sight reading example would be, given that this is our starting prime example. This is what we're currently working on. So because we're in a lesson book, I can make it easy for me and just flip back. Let's find a good one. Just flip back like a few pages, right? And this is kind of cheating because I know that this piece already, just because it's earlier in the book, is easier than this piece. But let's kind of look at it analytically. So let's take a look at Joy to the World. 4/4 time signature. Well, if you're playing in 3/4, you probably know how to play in 4/4, so you're probably good there. Basically, if you've been working on simple time signatures, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. Time signature, key signature, no sharps, no flats. A little bit of a weird hand position going on, starting with the thumb on, middle C. Should be right there. So a little bit different there. So you'd have to determine, have you played anything like that before? And if you haven't played anything like that before, can you figure it out really quick? And I would say, given the examples that we have, that yes, you can probably handle this one. We're going to look for note density. Would you say that the note density on this page is less or more than the note density on this page. I would say it's a little bit less, right? You can just visually glance at it and be like, there's less going on. So it's probably a good choice. Less than what you're currently working on. Not way easier. Here's a bad example. You know, say I was playing the piece that we were just talking about, and then say the next piece of sight reading is like this. Well, this is probably a little bit too easy. So just underneath what you're working on. Here's the second main tip I have for you.
It's a lot of responsibility.
Okay, here's the next tip. Are you ready for it? You want to, and I know it's gonna blow your mind, you want to think about what you're gonna do before you do it. I know. What exactly am I talking about? Well, it kind of went in with what we were talking about a minute ago, where we were looking through a piece. We were looking at note density. We were looking at time signature, key signature, tricky finger positions, things like that. Maybe where your starting hand position is going to be. All this stuff that I told you a minute ago is still relevant here. This is all the stuff you want to look for before you begin playing, because it's going to give you an idea on where your starting position is, what notes you're going to encounter with the key signature, what timing you're going to encounter with the time signature. So by analyzing this stuff ahead of time, and there's no time limit, you can take as long as you want. And you can take as long as you want to really analyze what you're going to do before you do it. It helps not only just with sight reading, but literally everything else in your life. In fact, I think we can all agree that we wish people would think a little bit more before they did stuff, including ourselves, right? Let's go on to number 3.
Great.
Okay, this next tip is you want to play through an example once as a genuine sight read. You know, you've never played it before. If you play it twice, it's not really a sight read, is it? But I recommend that you sight read through each example twice. So say you're working on the first line of this piece as your sight reading example. So there's our example. You're gonna play it once, and then say I mess up this note right here. Say I mess up those 3. I'm gonna play it again. I'm really gonna watch out for these circle notes. See if I can clean it up with just one more playthrough. Don't play it through like many times, because then, like I said, you're not really sight reading anymore. But I do recommend you do it twice. 1 for the sight read, 2 to clear up any mistakes you can. Because if you just skip over mistakes all the time, I feel like you're not really learning how to deal with them, and that's why we want that second playthrough.
Keep it up then.
All right, let's get on to the next tip, which is... This next tip is really important. So this is if you have a section of notes that's very difficult and you're like, ooh, you can't play it, and you gotta play it. You're playing for like a singer in the school, and there's this really angry teacher that wants you to play it right on the spot. Well, what do? You do this. You keep the important notes. I recommend you keep all of the melody notes, the notes up top, these ones, and as many of the bass notes as you can, especially if they hit on the beat. So this one, so those all hit on each of the 3 beats, and then same thing right here. So I am gonna make this a little bit simpler by omitting some of the notes. I'm gonna play through just the first 2, like where I circled, and then I'm gonna play through it again with some of the notes omitted and only playing the circled notes that I have. And I'll show you kind of what that does. So here's the first one. And then say I totally messed it up really bad. I would do this. And as you can see, it sounded more like of a skeleton of itself. You could still hear what was going on pretty much, right? You could still hear that melody, most of that bass line. Actually, the bass line is the melody in this one, so it makes it a little difficult, but just by omitting some of the notes, I made it a lot easier. This is really when you're in a pinch. You don't have time to really analyze ahead of time, or maybe you forgot to analyze. You're like, oh no, I need to pull this together at the last second. Well, that's how you do it. Let's get on to the next tip.
Just a tip, just for a second.
This next tip is one of the most important ones. There's actually even more important ones coming up. So keep paying attention, please. This next tip, you better be ready for this. It's how do you get better at sight reading? Think about that. I want you to think about that. How do you get better at sight reading? How do you get better at driving a car? How do you get better at running? How do you get better at playing piano? You do it every day. You play more often, you sight read more often. The more often you do it, the better you're going to be at it. So sight read every day and make it a regular part of your practice.
That doesn't really work, does it?
Guess what? Guess! Did you guess? It's quiz time. Everybody's favorite time of the day, of the year. You know what I'm talking about. All right, so I'm going to make sure that you've been paying attention so far in the lesson. You can answer like these 3 questions and answer them well. You get it so far. If you can't answer them or you're a little fuzzy on it, you need to rewatch the lesson again because you've been sleeping or you've been texting or you've been on Instagram or Discord or something. I can't help that, but I can try to make you stay on track with these 3 questions. Are you ready? All right, this first question is, how difficult should a sight reading example be? Be as specific as you can. You know, there's an easy answer to this, and then there's a little bit more of a fleshed out answer. See if you can give the really good one. Question 2 in the quiz is, how many times, this one's easy, should you play through a sight reading example? If you missed this, you've really been sleeping. So sleeping and slipping. You got to tighten it up. All right, let's go on to the next one. What should you do before you sight read a piece? Again, there's a short answer and probably a longer answer. Give as long of an answer as you possibly can. So if you could answer those 3 questions well, you're great. You're ready for the next tips. If not, you got to try again. Or watch again. So let's take a look here at number 6. It gets better and better.
My favorite number is 6.
Bert, nobody's favorite number is 6.
Number 6 is that you want to start with easy key signatures and work your way up to the harder ones. I briefly mentioned this in the beginning of the lesson, like tip number 1 or so, but it is that important that I need to bring it up again and go in more detail. So when you are sight reading for the first time, easier the better. Again, should be a little bit easier than what you're currently working on, but if it's your first few times, you know, you can make it a little bit easier for yourself. That's just fine. But gradually, once you play in the key of C a lot and sight read in the key of C a lot, well, you're gonna be like, well, I'm pretty freaking bored. So then after you've been playing a bunch in the key of C, maybe you want to pick the key of D minor here with 1 flat. So the whole goal is, you get the idea. Go from 0 sharp, 0 flats to 1 flat or 1 sharp, 2 flats and 2 sharps, 3 flats and 3 sharps. Don't jump from no sharps to all sharps because it will confuse you. Another sister tip. This is the sister tip to tip number 6. Okay, are you ready for it? The sister tip is that you also want to be learning your scale. So before you sight read something, so say you're sight reading something in the key of D minor, like we talked about a second ago, well, guess what? Guess what will help a lot? Learning the D minor scale. And do that for every key. That's why it's so important to learn your scales, everybody. All right, are you ready for the next tip? Are you ready for it? Are you ready for it? Are you ready for it? All right, here it comes. It's the same one. We're going to go by it real quick. It's not exactly the same, though, so you better pay attention. It's you want to start from simple time signatures and then work your way, guess what, to more complicated ones. I know you guys. All right, here we go. This is actually a tip that was a request from one of our students in the chat, and that is tips on sight reading both clefs at the same time. So everything I said up till now applies. However, when you're putting hands together, if you're not used to playing hands together yet, well, guess what? Don't sight read hands together. Sight read them separately, whatever you've been working on at the time. And then when you're ready to start sight reading hands together, guess what? This is a super important tip. You can apply this not only to piano, not only to everything in piano, not everything in music, not only everything in the entire universe, is that if you want to make something simpler, more digestible, easy to learn. You do what? You slow it down. Also, you do it every day. So that's why you sight read every day. But when you're your sight reading hands together, go really, really slow if you're not used to it already. And I know that you're like, really? Is that the answer? Yes, it is. Practice slow, and it won't let you down. I promise. I've been doing this for a while. Tip number 9, it's the most important one of all time. I know I've been saying that for like the last 3. But the next tip, of course, you want to watch more of my videos. I have a ton of them on the channel. It's crazy energy today. Crazy energy today. I specifically have some more about sight reading, but also I really like promoting this playlist here, wherever it's going to appear, where it's the most important tips I have on the channel. Watch it and it won't let you down. I'll see you in the next lesson. This has been Tim. Goodbye.